My name is Timothy Dunbar. This is my presentation on Dr. William Claytor for History of Math at Elizabeth City State University for spring of 2015. Dr. Claytor achieved much in his life, but he could have achieved more were it not for the racial climate of the time. Unfortunately, Dr. Claytor was the victim of pervasive racial injustices in the mathematical world. You'd think that mathematicians would not be racist, but apparently this was not the case. We will discuss his beginnings at Howard University, how he moved on to Penn State at the behest of Dudley Woodard, and then how the only job available to him after that, even though he was brilliant, was one at West Virginia State College. Then we will discuss the Rosenwald Fellowship and his subsequent postdoctoral work at the University of Michigan, and his rejection by Princeton, and how this basically resulted in him losing his interest in performing mathematical research. His job at the U.S. Army during World War II, and then of course how he eventually returned to Howard University, where he began in the first place, and how his meeting with David Blackwell culminated in that. His full name is William Waldron Schieffelin Claytor. I hope I'm saying his second middle name correctly. He was born in 1908 in Norfolk, Virginia, right around here. He earned his Associate of Business and Master of Arts at Howard University, as I said in the intro. Also, he was a product of the public school system in Washington, D.C. He earned his Associate's of Business and Master of Arts under the tutelage of Dudley Weldon Woodard. I'm not quite sure. I wasn't able to verify whether or not Dr. Woodard had attained his PhD at this time, but regardless, he would go on to be the first black man to earn his PhD, and he earned it from Penn State. He apparently inspired Dr. Claytor to go to Penn State, and where Dr. Claytor was only the third black man to earn his PhD, behind, of course, Dudley Woodard, as I said before, and a gentleman by the name of Elbert Cox. In Dr. Claytor's second year at Penn State, he earned the Harrison Scholarship, and then he earned the Harrison Fellowship in his third year. At the time, this was the most prestigious award offered at Penn State. For his dissertation on topological immersion of Peanian continua in a spherical surface, he eventually got his PhD. The faculty at Penn State, as a matter of fact, was very pleased with this dissertation, as it furthered the study of Peania continua, which is a subject of point-set topology. Sounds like very interesting stuff. I will have to delve into that when I have more time. Anyways, despite his being a brilliant student and his achievement in Peania continua, he was only offered one job. This, of course, was due to the racism in the mathematics world at the time, in the 1925-ish, 1930, 1940 era time frame. He did accept that job at West Virginia State, where he stayed for 3 years. During this time, he published 2 papers in the Annals of Mathematics, Topological Immersion of Peania continua in a Spherical Surface. This was his PhD dissertation, and I believe, at least from what I could tell, he eventually published it in a mathematical journal. And then the second one was Peania continua not embeddable in a spherical surface. He did go on, even though he was the third black man to earn a PhD, he actually was the first black man to publish mathematical research. So he beat out the other 2 guys. Anyways, he earned, later in this time, he earned a Rosenwald Fellowship to do his postdoctoral work at the University of Michigan. At the University of Michigan, he continued to do brilliant and inspired research. Unfortunately, even though a spot had opened up, a job opportunity had opened up, it was not given to Dr. Claytor. And again, this was because of racial prejudice, quite simply. Unfortunately for the University of Michigan. Also, the chair of the department for Penn State, at the math department at Penn State, was Robert Klein, and he continued to be Dr. Claytor's mentor throughout his lifetime, throughout his mathematical career. And at this time, knowing that University of Michigan wasn't going to give Dr. Claytor a job, unfortunately, John Robert Klein tried to get Princeton to offer Dr. Claytor a fellowship. Unfortunately, Princeton's administration also declined, fearing that students would not like a black man as a professor, which is completely retarded. Anyway, so this, all this pervasive racism and not being able to, he couldn't get a job basically with any topologist, which was a huge blow to Dr. Claytor's research, and this basically led to him, losing interest in doing research of any kind. And also, World War II was coming up. I imagine that had something to do with it. Everybody was getting called up to serve and go fight the Germans. And so Dr. Claytor eventually joined the Army, essentially, which is, take it as its worth, a waste of a mind such as his. But I guess, he used his time wisely there. He taught in the field of anti-aircraft artillery. So hopefully, Germans were, unable to bomb more civilians because of this. One would hope. He also, during this time, he gave some presentations at AMS meetings, so American Mathematical Society meetings. Unfortunately, again, because of racial prejudice, he wasn't allowed to stay in a hotel, and this made him embittered him, made him a very bitter man, which is understandable. I think were this done to me, I would be very bitter as well. I would have probably left the field of mathematics. As a matter of fact, I don't think I could have handled it. Also during this time, luckily, he met a guy named, well, luckily or unlucky, I guess depends on how you look at it. He met a man named David Blackwell. David Blackwell, interestingly enough, would actually go on to become the chair of the math department at Howard University. I'm not actually sure. He might have been the chair at the time of meeting Dr. Claytor. I could not confirm this. But in any case, David Blackwell recognized Dr. Claytor's brilliance and petitioned for him to come back to Howard University. And if you recall at the beginning of this video, I told you that that's where Dr. Claytor began his education. So David Blackwell recognized his genius. He got him to come back to Howard University and teach there, where he basically he taught until he retired, eventually becoming the chair of the math department himself at Howard University. Some interesting notes. He did research throughout this time. He actually got back into research seemingly throughout this time at Howard University. But he also met his wife, Dr. May Pullins. He never again published any more papers, unfortunately. One can only surmise that his papers would have been brilliant had he the taste for it anymore. But he, as I said, became chair. He retired in 1965, and he met Dr. May Pullins. And that's basically all he did. So we discussed Dr. Claytor's achievements. He was the first black man to publish mathematical research. He was the third black man to earn a PhD. We discussed his beginnings at Howard University, his PhD at Penn State under the influence of Dudley Woodard and John Klein, and then also his tenure at West Virginia State College, and then his postdoctoral work at University of Michigan, how Princeton, being the most ignorant mistake they probably ever made, rejected him, and then how the U.S. Army benefited from that rejection by Princeton, and then how Dr. Howard eventually returned to, or Dr. Claytor eventually returned to Howard University. This has been my presentation on Dr. William Waldron Schieffelin Claytor, and thank you very much.